You know what, guys? I think I'm just going to have to come out and say it. Someone has to. I'm going to give, for the first time in my YouTube career, a completely original opinion. You ready? CGI babies are weird. There we go. I said it. The CGI baby in Squid Game was weird. Gosh damn, ugly little freeloader somehow winning the bloody games. You know, that weird, slightly uncanny valley little nugget? Think it was weird. Right, so there we go. That's my synopsis of Squid Game Season 3. Weird baby, much darker tone than Season 2. Gi-hoon has like 0 lines. And the VIPs were lame to watch. So I'm thinking maybe 8 anime girls out of 10 Marvel figurines. Yeah. It's a decent watch. You should totally recommend it to your co-workers, although be sure to pick ones who can handle a bit of melancholy, because, God, this show was so depressing, and such a drag. Oh my God, it's just sadness and sadness and sadness and sadness and sadness the whole way through. God, you know what, now that I think about it, no anime girls out of 10 Marvel figurines. No, none. Into the naughty corner, Squid Game. Into the naughty corner. Go. Get out of here. Yes, so anyway, guys, that's my review. Make sure to leave the Angry Dickhead YouTube channel a sub, and don't forget to like and comment. Say, did you know that only 15% of viewers are actually subscribed? I think Squid Game Season 3 might just be one of the most interesting studies of politics in media that I've seen in a little while. I'm writing and recording this pretty much as of the show coming out, so I haven't really seen people's response to it yet, but I have a feeling it's going to be divisive. Probably because it's divisive to me, internally. The whole series is a great example of why it's so difficult, or it can be so difficult, to make a point with your art and actually stick to it, or embody it, rather. Why it can be so difficult to make said point and then actually adhere to it yourself in your creation of a project and strike a balance with it when applying it to your work. And also why it's best not to confuse inherent evil with manufactured evil. Season 2 particularly did not quite nail those things. You see, Squid Game Season 3 is a bit of a return to form for the series. But it's also an attempt at truly, at all levels of the filmmaking process, executing on its core ideas and its main point. So here's why I feel it makes that part divisive, but no doubt very, very interesting. You all know about video game criticism, right? I mean, I'm guessing if you're on the side of YouTube that would recommend to you my videos, you probably have at least some idea of what that kind of space is like. Anyway, there's this phrase that sometimes gets used in video game criticism, never by IGN, because they are hacks who would give a hot pile of dog feces a 7 out of 10, but I guess not. It's used not quite by the more snobbish creators, but I guess more the ones who just take themselves seriously. It's called Ludonarrative dissonance, a very fancy sounding word for a not very fancy concept, coined by game designer Clint Hocking in 2007. The whole idea behind ludonarrative dissonance is that the entire game as a whole is pushing a certain narrative, a certain story. The actual plot and story events of the game are only one way of conveying that idea. The core idea behind it is also that the actual gameplay of said game also contributes to the overall narrative. Now, ludonarrative harmony, ludonarrative dissonance's more accomplished sibling, is when in a game the gameplay and story tell the same story. They work together to create a cohesive narrative. A good example of this is your good old-fashioned, just like Grandmama used to make 'em, Souls games. The story, through characters, environment, descriptions of items, etc., they all tell you that the world is harsh and rotten and unforgiving, and the plot beats reinforce this idea of decay as though you are venturing through the carcass of a once titanic and majestic beast, and the gameplay is usually unforgiving, difficult, and ominous. The two pieces of the puzzle work together cohesively to create a unified narrative. Basically, the gameplay and the story push the same idea and themes and work together to reinforce each other and more effectively impart these ideas and themes onto the audience. Capiche? Ludonarrative dissonance is basically the opposite of that. Ludonarrative dissonance specifically is when gameplay and story don't match up. But I like to use the phrase to apply to whenever certain elements of a work are thematically or ideologically at odds with each other. Like, despite how trying to be a criticism of capitalism and evil corporations, Cyberpunk 2077 costs $105 on PS5. Jesus, how? That's borderline Adobe levels of ridiculous pricing. But in all seriousness, a good example of ludonarrative dissonance is basically any horror game that gives you a gun. Well, at least a gun that actually damages the horrors that you're up against. Don't worry, Stalker, we're not talking about you. You see, you can have all the atmosphere, spooky presentation, and creepy exposition you like, but the instant you give me a shotgun, this is no longer me running or hiding for my life. This is doom, and I'm sending that demon straight back to goddamn hell. Especially games where there are large numbers of monsters or whatever. Zombie games are really egregious at this one. No matter how much the story and the world insists that, again, this is a horror game and this is scary, no, the instant you have a gun, it's just a shooter. So you can see how there would be something of a thematic disconnect there, right? If the story is telling you that you're small and you're powerless and you should be afraid of the things that stalk in the night, but the gameplay is you cracking said things' skulls open with a sledgehammer, clearly both elements aren't, they're not talking to each other, they're not quite working in harmony. Now, this is exactly why I think this term should not be hogged by games, and instead should be used by the rest of the arts, including film, obviously, because it's a very succinct way of explaining how separate elements of any creative work are meant to work together to create the overall desired effect. Yes, I know there's similar phrases like thematic disconnect and blah, 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 but ludonarrative dissonance is much more cool and smart sounding, so, too bad. Now that I've explained all of this, I need to lay the groundwork for what's so interesting about Season 3 of Squid Game. The fact that Season 2 had a particularly bad case of, you guessed it, ludonarrative dissonance. You see, something that I picked up on, and evidently many others did also, was that tonally, Season 2 felt all over the place. There was a distinct mismatch between a lot of the actual events happening in the story and how how the story was treating said events. Not to mention the direction and cinematography made an interesting attempt at trying to convey the bleak tone that should be inherent to so many people being systematically murdered for the entertainment of a very few. I feel they should be taking that somewhat more seriously than they do in that season, and not doing goofy crash-ins on the characters. Like, yeah, I see where they were going, where they were trying to juxtapose it against the more serious tone of the third season, but it just doesn't work. Like, I see the vision, but I do feel they should have executed on it differently. You know, treating such serious subject matter and your own political point that you're making with the work with goofy crash-ins, comic relief characters, although I do love Mr. Choi, just kind of undermines it. The ideas and the presentation, they do not sync up. They do not convey the same themes and tone. They do not work to create the same narrative. Hence, ludonarrative dissonance. This is where I, and I feel many of the other people who were critical of that season, had their main problems. And it would seem that in response the crew and creators listened, or alternatively they may have already written it in one go and there was still somehow a mismatch. I'm not sure, I don't actually know like the pipeline that they had for creating the last two seasons of Squid Game. Anyway, because the third season does rectify this problem. It treats the slaughter of hundreds of people mercilessly for entertainment as a bad thing. Who would have guessed? And it acknowledges the systematic injustice without shooting itself in the foot with all of the goofy bullshit that plagued Season 2. And yet, Season 3 runs into a new problem. And also another one that's plagued the whole series. Season 3 of Squid Game is downright melancholic, and it almost misses the point with how it handles its criticism of the modern capitalist system. Now, for my subscribers, you probably know where I'm going with this, to some level. Yeah, no duh, you look at my content, it's just barely, like, slightly. If you squint hard enough, you can potentially make out that I don't like unregulated capitalism. I don't like big corporations being big corporations, and I have these bizarre beliefs like the state should provide at minimum a dignified life for all of its constituents no matter their circumstance, so you know, a roof over their head, food, and the ability to see a doctor. Also, that in order for a meritocracy to even have a chance at existing or being even a functioning system, everyone needs to at least have a decent chance to even get off the ground. And that allowing some to fail based purely on the luck of their birth, and others to become wildly successful through endless exploitation of the system and its institutions, kind of, you know, defeats the whole point of capitalism and the free market if you can just rig it in your favour. So, unsurprisingly, yes, I think the metaphors and ideas at play behind Squid Game are, yes, things that need to be said. And its criticism of the modern world and late-stage capitalism is absolutely valid. Heck, it's downright needed. But something that's always formed a point of contention for me with this is how the show has used its metaphors to express this. And I feel it almost misses the point. See, the way the actual Squid Game, like the actual game itself, is structured no duh, it's a metaphor for society. You don't have to be an expert media analyst to work that one out. And in Season 3, particularly in the final game, this metaphor does get pretty obvious. The whole, let's decide how everyone's going to die democratically angle is hardly subtle, and the fact that it all turns to shit and survival of the most immoral and cunning takes over anyway, wowie again, it's hardly subtle. My issue with this metaphor isn't its presentation. These things do need to be somewhat obvious, you know, at the end of the day, otherwise people won't get them. I know, media literacy is absolutely in the shitter. It's in the fact that Squid Game sits half in, half out on the whole confusing inherent evil with manufactured evil issue. See, this issue, inherent evil and manufactured evil, is as simple as this. Some things are inherently evil, whereas others are made evil, turned evil, or used for evil. Capitalism, the system, is a manufactured evil, not inherent. Like any socio-economic system or tool, etc., capitalism does not inherently create evil or do evil. It's just a system. See, it's much like a gun, you know? A gun is neither inherently good nor evil. It's a tool, it's impartial, but it can be used to cause evil. It can become a manufactured evil. The point is that in the hands of the right and responsible people, decided through due process, a gun can be a tool for good. It's a powerful weapon used for protecting and serving the community. But a gun in the hands of, say, an autocratic dictator, a mentally unstable teenager on his last straw, or a baby, apparently, is now a tool for evil. It does not protect, it only destroys and causes harm. This is exactly my argument for heavily regulated capitalism. Capitalism is a tool, depending on whose hands it is in, capable of either creating large amounts of wealth, constructing incredibly helpful and productive and innovative businesses, incentivizing innovation, blah blah blah, all that, or great harm and inequality. And at the end of the day, the rich and their corporations should never, ever overshadow the elected government. The whole point of democracy is Magna Carta, power to the people, to elect representatives to lead their nations, not to allow a rich, unelected class to take the power from the people. And that's where I feel Squid Game gets so close to mistaking the tool as an inherent evil rather than a manufactured one. See, capitalism isn't inherently evil. It just, usually very easily and absolutely all of the time, does get used for evil. As much as I feel to some there may not be much of a distinction between the two in this case, I do feel some detail needed to be put in here to assert that. Because, you see, the game in Squid Game is inherently evil. It's a giant human meat grinder created for the entertainment purposes of the elite. I think perhaps what they should have had is maybe a little nod at that maybe one day before, back when the game started, they weren't death games. You know, elimination was just that, being removed from the game. Perhaps maybe with even more debt than when they started. But eventually, the elites watching got bored. They needed higher stakes, greater entertainment, and the system has now been irreparably altered to be nothing but an endless murder machine. Now, me personally, I do like this idea a bit more, because first off, it builds out the VIPs somewhat more and emphasizes the insatiable greed the oligarchs of today exhibit, how nothing is never enough for them and the system only gets crueler and more unfair by the year. I just think there's a little bit of nuance, bump this metaphor up a notch or two. Now, what I do like about the latest or last two seasons is how democracy was entered into the metaphor. Voting after every game is, in my opinion, one of the best additions to the show. And it not only attacks the two-party system and black and white view of politics that emerges because of that, but also how in a world where the rich are more powerful than the vote of the majority, democracy doesn't really matter. They'll always win somehow. It is eerily accurate, considering everything going on in the US right now. See, in the last two, particularly final season, I feel Squid Game has gotten more serious with its analogy. It's added more parts to its metaphor, even if I do wish it had added a couple more, and it's taken the feedback from Season 1 that a lot of people didn't get said metaphor, and it's made it more clear and tried to embody it in more aspects of the production. But that's finally where I feel Season 3 will be so divisive. Because unlike Season 2, with all the ludonarrative dissonance that plagued it, Season 3 strived for ludonarrative harmony. The tone got more serious and somber, the cinematography got more objective and zoned in, the pace slowed, it treated the seriousness of its subject matter as serious. And what I worry is that this approach might be lost on the audience. See, the reason for my worrying is something that has plagued many shows as of late. When they try to take their political or dark subject matter seriously in their presentation, they either become boring, their quality declines, or more commonly they become very bleak and dark. The Boys Season 4 did all of these. And that season of The Boys is a good example of what worries me here. Because people didn't quite respond as well to it as previous seasons. There was, of course, the usual crowd of smooth brains going, "Durr, why you make it political? I not like politics, it was never political." And, of course, saying that about a show which has always been very, very boldly political. Again, this is why you need to be obvious about about these things. People somehow don't get it. But there's also crowds of people criticising the quality decline in its writing, and maybe the even more pessimistic outlook and tone, etc, etc. Now, Squid Game Season 3, in my opinion, luckily, doesn't suffer from some of these. I never felt bored during the new season, and I actually think in terms of writing and production quality, it may very well be actually the best of the 3 seasons. I mean, the VIPs are still one-dimensional assholes, which, yeah, I get the whole point is that we're meant to hate them, but also probably fear them and, want to topple them. But besides that, Squid Game Season 3 probably is the best season of the lot. And that's what worries me, because it's also the slowest paced season, the most depressing season, and the most somber season. Now, whilst the tone of this series is quite enjoyable and palatable to a film nerd like me, general audiences do have a habit of not liking this sort of thing, and not to and of course, not to infantilize the general population here, but they do have a habit of getting bored when there aren't enough flashing lights and colours on the screen. So that's what worries me with Squid Game Season 3. That it's the most overt season with its messaging. That it's the most serious about its subject matter, and the darkest in tone, which is fitting for its events. It has achieved ludonarrative harmony. It's a sad and cruel world that the show is set in, so it has objective cinematography, bleak colour palettes, and a slower pace. It is, by most criteria, what Squid Game needs to be in order to make the points that it wants to make. But what I fear is that, like other shows like it, like The Boys Season 4, the people will just see the more depressing outlook and write it off based off of that. They'll complain that they're getting annoyed, or that they're too sad, or that it's too preachy because the political messages become more clear and more bleak. Only time will tell to see if any of this comes true, but it may very well be received amazingly. The world is, I guess, in something of a position to accept these ideas. But no matter the verdict in the court of public opinion, I think it's Squid Game's most interesting season. Even if I think its critiques of capitalism needed a little bit more polish, or that, yes, that baby did look weird, it's still a story that I feel needs telling. And again, especially considering the state of the world at the moment. So good on you, Hwang Dong-hyuk, for having the guts to make your show more serious. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. I've been filmed by Stace.
I wish I could give you up, but you're my new favorite drug. Enter into my blood, run with my toxic